Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mountaineer Locker Room then and now. I'm Greg Chris, along with Mr. Frank Fear. Frank, as we say each week, another week closer, and practice got underway today, and we can't wait. And I know we're excited, and we have a fantastic guest, or what a perfect guest to have as the season gets ready to start now. We've got the master of the information coming out of WVU, and uh, now we know, and again, or we're seeing again, not now we know, but again, we're seeing a great author as well. And we're looking forward to talking to John tonight. We've had him on the show before, but his new book is getting ready to come out. We're very excited to talk about that. And I know you, as an author yourself, um, you're anxious to talk to him about this book, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. Always a pleasure to talk with John. Great stories, such a perspective historically, which is really important. I mean,
Yep.
we know that what's coming up is really what grabs all fans, no matter the school. But getting a feel for the history and who did what, and then learning about stories that you never would have known otherwise. John was a student at WVU, has been on staff since 1991, and he's done so many wonderful things. Now, senior director of athletic content, and uh, and so it's a real pleasure. Every time I talk with John, my IQ goes up a bit, and boy, I need that. I'll tell you.
I was going to say, I need to spend a few months with him, or maybe years. I think we discussed one week, and I topped out, in the academic end of things about the seventh grade, and so I desperately need some of that help. Um, Not much else going on. We got West Virginia coming up tomorrow night. We got football practice has begun, and I know that's what everybody is so anxiously awaiting. And I think, with that being said, I think we've got more than enough to talk about with John. So, Darren, if you want to go ahead and bring him in so we can get a look at him, and uh, we'll get talking about this, among other things, the book especially. And let's start with that. You've got the book release coming soon, and I know I've already talked to people who can't wait to read it. And when you see a historic book like this about an iconic figure, the stories that come with that. We
Mm,
know about his career, we know about his successes, and but I don't know that people always know the man or the person like
yeah.
some of us did. And I think this, from what I've seen of it, really exemplifies that. So, John, I'll let you talk about that. You
Well, I
go.
appreciate that. This book was written about 10 years ago, and it kind of sat in a hard drive on my shared drive. And then last year, there was a reunion being planned for the 50th anniversary of Bowden's Peach Bowl team in 1975 coming up this fall. And this book was kind of sitting there. I'd forgotten about it. And the guys asked, they said, would you be interested in writing a book about Coach Bowden? And I thought, well, I was kind of coy about it because when you're dealing with regional publishing and whatnot, there's always obstacles and hoops and things that you got to get through. So I was a little coy about it. But at the same time, the people at West WVU Press, the publishing company here on campus, um, reached out to me about something else. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I've got something that may be of interest to you. And so we kind of developed it the last fall. And then I went back and kind of polished it up and updated it and so forth and turned it into a book. And, the interesting thing about Bobby Bowden, first of all, he was 46 when he left West Virginia. The greatest achievements of his coaching career took place in his 50s and 60s. He's the oldest coach to win a national championship. Okay. And he is the oldest to win a first national championship. He is the oldest coach to win a national championship. And if you Google search greatest coaches in college football history, you're eventually going to get to Bobby Bowden. I mean, Woody Hayes is going to be there, Nick Saban's going to be there, Bear Bryant, on and on. Bobby's name's in that list. If you Google search greatest West Virginia coaches, Bobby's name's not going to come up there. And I said, well, that's interesting. That's fascinating. Let's explore that. And that's kind of what this book does.
Get myself off of mute here. I think you know uh, a lot of folks younger than us, of course, but younger than me and Frank, but we remember the Bobby Bowden days here, and they weren't not all glorious and a pretty rough ending and that sort of thing. Um, and then I think as time went on, and people realized what a tremendous coach he was, the West Virginia years were kind of forgotten. I mean, if you think about Bobby Bowden, you don't think West Virginia, you think Florida State, obviously. Right. Yep.
Number of West Virginia fans that were happy to see him go.
Oh yeah.
And the interesting thing, when he took the Florida State job, he asked all his coaches, do you want to come? And only two went with him. The others, some of them didn't think he was going to win at Florida State because at the time, Florida dominated the state. You had Miami in the state. You had a lot of different things. But, Bowden kind of caught things right there because I think Florida might have gone on probation at some point during that time. The population movement into the state of Florida. He was able to get access to a lot more players. He was always a great recruiter, and he was able to flip that thing pretty fast. Because when he went to Florida State, a lot of people were going, well, that may not be a step up for him. And quickly he turned it into something that was, he really elevated that school to another level.
Yeah, and you mentioned that a lot of people were happy to see him go. Yeah, I can remember. I old enough to remember seeing the hangings and effigy and that sort of thing out on the streets and that kind of stuff. People wouldn't believe that now. But even with Don Nealon, I was at his the last game at WU and he announced that he was stepping down, and you know I was out in the parking lot preparing to leave, and the Blue Lot parking lot erupted with cheers.
Yeah.
And here's this iconic figure that brought the program to a new level, and then ended that way. Of course, with Bowden, it was at the beginning, and so you see that happen, and I mean it's easy to look back and say, well, can't believe people were ready to see him leave, but that's the nature of the business, and like you said, he was very young and really hadn't established himself yet as this iconic coach. Frank, you want to jump in and throw a few questions there?
Yeah, I mean that noise in the background. I think John is a wide receiver who got cut today. I think that was that. That's what that noise was. But
Yeah.
seriously, I was really pleased that WVU Press reached out, sent me a pre-publication copy, and read it. And the thing, I don't think I've told you this, but I told the publisher that the thing that I like the most about it is that, particularly in this day of spin and branding and the presentation of a persona that can do no wrong. One of the things that you really do a great job of, and it's not in a critical way, it's in a very authentic way, and that is show Bobby Bowden's vulnerability. He wasn't quite sure he was going to be successful as a head coach, and you in his own voice and also in the voice of others, you get that feeling of and we've all gone through this in our professional careers, but particularly when you start. Am I going to be able to make it here? Am I going to be able to be as good as I think it can be? Can I hang on? And you get that feeling in that book. And to me, it was very refreshing. And I think as to the realism of how you've written that book.
Well, he mentioned um, frequently that every step in his coaching career was a step up, but every place he was, whether he was the coach at South Georgia or Howard or wherever he was, or he was the court or he was the wide receivers coach at Florida State, when something went wrong, he wasn't blamed. Either they didn't care or he didn't get the blame. The head coach got the blame. And it was the same way when he came to West Virginia to become the offensive coordinator. But once he became the head coach, everything fell on his shoulders. So if the defense wasn't playing well, he had to answer to that. If the running backs weren't running, whatever it was that goes on in a football program, he had to deal with that. And for the first time in his career, that first year when he took over for Jim Carlin, first of all, there were a lot of people that were upset that Carlin had left because he had pieced that together and built it from one year to the next, to the next, to the next, and he left for Texas Tech. And so people were upset about that. Carlin brought Bowden here. And so there was that comparison immediately. Okay, is this guy, can he measure up to Jim Carlin? Carlin left Bowden a really good team in 1970, an established quarterback, an excellent backfield, and more important than the players that he left him a great schedule. The teams that they played that year, including Penn State, it was not one of the strongest schedules that West Virginia faced. And so you have those things. You have a good team. You have a good schedule. You have preseason publicity. They were ranked in a lot of the polls. So there were big expectations going into that first year. And he got off to a great start. They were dominant in the first 3 games. And then he goes and he loses the Duke game on homecoming. And in that game, his punter punts the ball from inside the 40, and instead of punting it out of bounds, punts it up into the stands. They end up losing that game, and people are going, okay, what's going on here? And then the game after that is the game that everybody knows, the backyard brawl, when he has the big lead, and they're not able to hold on to the lead, and they lose the game. So right off the bat, his first year, he had a couple of losses that people are like, okay, what's going on here? And then each year, as it went along, he would get off to a good start and then maybe lose a game. They'd lose a game to Tulane or Richmond, or there was always a game in there or something that happened that people were going, what's going on here? That type of thing. And I think for him, and I've heard him, I was fortunate enough to be able to listen to him speak to the West Virginia team when they brought him back for some type of function. Bill Stewart brought him back, and I was in the back of the room, and I was able to listen to him talk to the players. And one of the things I remember distinctly him telling the players was, you cannot repeat mistakes. And I think that's something that he learned during his coaching career, because there were things that he either tried out here, trick plays, different things that he tried out here that maybe didn't work, that by the time he got to Florida State, he'd figured it out. There were a lot of things in his coaching career that he figured out. Recruiting. I remember Duke Henshaw telling me the story of when he went to Florida State. The first thing he told the coaches was, I do not want to be in the home of anybody that's being recruited by Florida. It's just a waste of time. We're not going to get them. Florida State's not going to beat Florida for recruits. Well, he learned that here. The same thing applied with Penn State, and the same thing applied in Western PA to a degree with Pitt. He didn't want to. He knew that if a recruit was going to consider Penn State in West Virginia, it was a waste of time. There were things that he learned. 2 quarterbacks. If you go back and you look at the year that I think Bowden went to the Orange Bowl, I think the first really good team he had at Florida State, he played 2 quarterbacks. Well, he did that here. And that was something that Bear Bryant had told him one year when he had a bad year, when he had no quarterbacks. He said, you always want to try to have 2 quarterbacks. And they had the 2 quarterback system for the Peach Bowl season in 75, something he learned here. So there were a lot of things that he was learning and trying out and perfecting here that he eventually did when he went to Florida State.
Yeah, you talk about that Duke game. I was there for that, and it was really the precursor of what happened in the second half of the Pitt game. Is that, and this is one of the things he learned. He just had to recruit bigger, stronger defenders, because Duke did that in the second half. They were afraid of the quarterback. Was that Leon Hart? I didn't.
That was
look back. Who was the quarterback?
That was Leon Hart. And the interesting
and
thing, Duke's coach Tom Harp was the guy that Red
Yeah.
Brown was pursuing when he called Bobby Dodd down at Georgia Tech, and he said, "What do you know about Harp?" He said, "Well, he's okay, but you ought to consider my guy, Jim Carlin." And that's how Brown got in touch with Carlin and brought him here. And I remember Carlin was great, by the way. I had gotten two really long, in-depth interviews with Jim Carlin, and he offered a lot of perspective on Bobby Bowden. And Jim was a guy that always spoke his mind, unvarnished truth, and I got some of that because I had written something that he didn't like, and he called me right back, and after he'd read it, and he said, "Boy, get your paper out, get your pencil out, and start writing." And he explained, and it was about the Peach Bowl in '69. And I had mentioned that Bowden was the one that had changed the offense to the wishbone. They had that year they had Jim Braxton, they had Bob Gresham, and they had Eddie Williams. And Carlin said, "No, that's not what happened. Bobby, I had to make him go down to Texas with Jack Fligg and learn the wishbone because he didn't want to do it. He wanted to run the veer." He said, and Carlin said, "Bobby, we've got running backs. We don't have wide receivers. We've got Oscar Patrick's hurt, so forth." He said, "We're going to do that." And he made Bowden do that. And he was explicit about explaining that to me and making sure that I had that accurate, because I think that was something that kind of stuck in his craw a little bit. And I think when he hired Bowden, he didn't even know him. Just had met him in passing, I think, at a camp. And Carlin told me the story. He was in a room with Bobby Dodd and Bear Bryant, and this is in the mid '60s, and they were talking about the passing game, Bryant and Dodd. And Carlin said he's sitting there listening to him, and he said they were talking about it like it was a disease. And he said to himself, "Well, if I ever get to be a head coach, I'm going to find a guy that understands the passing game." And that's how he got in touch with Bowden. Bowden also had an opportunity to go to Auburn at the same time that he was considering West Virginia. And in Bowden's words, the way he explained it to me, he felt like he could get a head coaching job quicker at West Virginia because Carlin was going to give him full reign of the offense. And he also figured in the back of his mind, well, Carlin's a Southern guy. This is a rebuild job at West Virginia. It's more of a basketball school than it is a football school at that time. He may not be here that long, and I may be able to get that job, and everything kind of worked out that way. And so that's how Bowden got to West Virginia. And I think the other thing that people kind of forget about is that he was here 10 years.
Mm.
That's a considerable amount of time in coaching, between the years that he was the coordinator and the years that he was the head coach. So Bowden always, mentioned it. I'm from Alabama, but my kids consider themselves from Morgantown. And I think that's the way all of his children felt because they spent a good portion of their lives here.
Hmm. That's one great story, Craig. I'll tell you. There's always a story behind the story, and that story fits the persona. Fits his persona completely because uh, Jim was a CEO type coach, and it makes it. I had to force this guy under my direction to do what he didn't want to do. Sounds like a traditional CEO who's in charge. But of course, can you think of a better offense to run given the fact that it was a monsoon in Atlanta that night? They had tried, I think, what, 2 or 3 passes that night. So it all worked out, and people want the credit for it. It's understandable.
Right. And Carlin was a defensive minded coach. They didn't talk about complimentary football back then. That wasn't a term that people used back then. But that's the type of coach he was. He wanted to complement his defense. He was a defensive minded coach because he was a defensive coordinator, and he also emphasized the kicking game. So for him to kind of step out of his comfort zone to get a guy like Bobby Bowden, who was wanted it wide open, was going to run reverses from inside his own 10, who was going to try long bombs, who was going to do different things, who was going to be a riverboat gambler. That says something about Carlin. And I think that, that also says something about how those two were able to work together. And I think Bowden, I think he learned from Carlin, the importance of discipline. Frank, you mentioned too about, being the CEO type. Carlin was the guy who everything was, mapped out. Everything was scheduled out. The guys, the players, I talked to were, that was the thing that was always impressed upon them was, be on time and that sort of thing. And the other thing about Carlin was there was a distance between Carlin and the players. And, there was, he wasn't as nearly as approachable as Bobby was. And I think Bobby, when he first got the job here, I think he went to the other extreme where he was approachable to the point where I think he might have felt like some of the players maybe took advantage of that. There's the story in the 72 Peach Bowl. A lot of people thought that the guys, went down to Atlanta and had too much fun in that game. And soon after that, Bobby tightened things up. I mean, he really tightened the ship up. And, the long hair and the Fu Manchu mustache and the camo flaw, all that stuff that the guys were wearing back at that time. He was kind of tightening up the rules a little bit. So again, these are things that as you go as a coach, he's experiencing these things for the first time. One other thing just popped into my head, and I think this is very important to understand. I think you have to put that era in the proper context because you had the Vietnam War, you had campus integration, you had a Roe versus Wade, you had a lot of things going on politically at that time. And a lot of the coaches back then, you think of guys like Woody Hayes and Bo Schembechler, Ben Schwartzwater at Syracuse that were kind of authoritarian type coaches. Well, in the 70s, a lot of these guys were having to retreat. Woody was turning the other head when Cornelius Green was high stepping into the end zone for Ohio State, and Bo's players were wearing mustaches and their hair outside their helmets. These guys had to kind of take a different tack to the players from that era, and I think Bowden was in that same category where he had to deal with different things. And one other quick point I want to make here. Bobby was from Birmingham, Alabama, and that is very important because Birmingham, Alabama, back in the 60s was considered the worst city in the country for racial relations. You remember you had Bull Connor and the dogs and all the things that were going on with the civil rights protesting. And Bobby, as a matter of fact, Bobby and all of the coaches that Carlin brought here had never coached a black player before they got to West Virginia University. And not only that, a lot of the black players that were here weren't Southern blacks. They were Northern blacks, which a different political outlook, a different, Garrett Ford and John Mallory had different viewpoints than Oscar Patrick or Pete Wood or guys like that. And Bobby had to navigate all of that. And, as Bobby told me, he said, I didn't have a prejudiced bone in my body, even though I grew up in a segregated situation where whites drank out of a certain water fountain and blacks drank out of a different water fountain. And certain people sat in the front of the bus and other people sat in the back of the bus. Bobby never viewed it that way. And I think one of the things that he did that was masterful, and I think it really speaks to him, and I think it speaks to, the coach that he became. When he got here, he knew right off the bat when he was the offensive coordinator that he had to get Garrett Ford on his side. Garrett Ford was the best player. He was a black player. And so Bobby invited him over to his house, and Garrett didn't want to go, but he did, and he had dinner with him, and man, I remember Garrett telling me he's bouncing Terry and Tommy on his knees, and by the end of the evening, Bobby had won him over, and he knew he had to do that. And one of the stories that I can remember them telling was that Garrett and Mallory wanted to room on the roads together. Okay. And Carlin had a strict rule that position players room together. So Garrett was going to be with a white running back. And in the way Carlin explained it to Garrett was, well, what if I told you you had to room with Mallory? And that was a different way of looking at things. And I think those guys, at a time when you're integrating the campus, you're more blacks. And another thing that was really important, Carlin asked Mallory. He said, "What can we do to get more black players here?" And Mallory said, "Well, you need to get more black girls on campus." And there, in that time period, and you guys would know that because you grew up in that time period, interracial dating was frowned upon. And in some places, it was risky. And so, you got Mallory and Patrick and those guys are saying, "Listen, you bring us here. Well, what do you expect us to do? How, there's 20 black players on the team and you got 8 black girls on campus. The math doesn't add up." And so these were all things that Bobby Bowden and Jim Carlin were having to deal with, in addition to having a winning football team. And I think if you look back at that time period, I think it was amazing how they were able to put all that together, people from different diverse backgrounds, and make it all work.
Yeah, social context matters, and you just can't look at what's happening on the field. You've got to also consider what's happening in broader society. And then to continue that story, Garrett Ford is hired his first year. Bobby hired him his first year as an assistant coach, and he was obviously the first African American assistant coach in WVU history. And it's again, you get to see not only the perspective of a Bobby Bowden, not just to try to get Garrett on his side politically, that was important, but he also wanted to make sure that they were part of the team and could contribute in the way that he knew that they needed to contribute. He wanted to create those opportunities. So it said a lot about him.
Well, it does, and too, they were good players. When they took over here, they had 2 guys that could run under a sub 540. They knew that they had to become more athletic. The style of play that was adopted here before they got here was the Midwestern Big Ten, slow, physical style, and they needed to change that. So they knew that they were going to have to change the way that they were going to play. And part of the issues that Bowden had early with smaller type defensive linemen, that was from the system that Carlin had preferred when he was at Georgia Tech. And so eventually, you're right, Frank, they had to transition to bigger, more physical players like they had on their schedule. You kind of recruit to your schedule. It's not so much what USC and Ohio State and Michigan's doing. It's what is Penn State, what's Syracuse, what's Pitt doing, what are those teams doing, and how do you have to counter that? And if you look in this climate, it's okay to have guys that are fast and athletic and quick in September, okay, maybe October, but when you get into November and it gets cold and it gets windy and it gets rainy, those big guys make a difference. And again, those were things that Bowden learned and adjusted to, and got accustomed to when he was at West Virginia. And again, I just think about all of the growth that he had here, but I also think too about the growth that West Virginia University had while he was here. Because the point I make is that not only did Bowden become better, but he made us better. There were things that he pointed out that we needed that maybe weren't done when he was here, but eventually were in place by the time Don Nealon was available in 1980. So multi-year contracts was one thing. And I tell the story, and actually it begins with the basketball coach, Gail Catlett, and their pursuit of him in the early 70s. And they went over, Red Brown and Leland Bird went over to talk to Gail about the basketball job when he was at Cincinnati. And at the time, Gail was one of the hot young coaches in the country. and they get into talking about it a little bit. And then Gail asks him, he says, well, how many years can you offer me? And they said, what do you mean? He said, well, I have a 5-year rollover contract at Cincinnati. What can you do? He said, we only have year-to-year contracts. That was something that was always in the back of the coaches' minds. It was always in the forefront of the coaches recruiting against West Virginia, because they used it against them. They would tell recruits, hey, what, this guy's got a 1-year contract. All their coaches have 1-year contracts. Who's to say they're going to be there next year? And it hurt him in recruiting a little bit. And so that was something that needed to be changed. It was changed with Catlin, and obviously by the time Nealon was here, that was fixed. And then the other thing, of course, was the stadium. And the stadium became a big piece toward the end of Bowden's career when the situation got to the point where they were at the point where they're going to have to condemn it because it had gotten so bad. So it was either spend a whole bunch of money on refurbishing the stadium and keeping it downtown, keeping the store owners and all of the property owners and so forth down on campus happy, or find another place in town to build it. And eventually the decision was made a lot through people in Charleston. And again, this goes back to Carlin. When Carlin used to go around the state and talk to the Kiwanis clubs and all the different places, he would tell them, listen, you got to think a little bit bigger than you're thinking right now. Marshall isn't going to do it. You're going to need to be thinking about, we want to play Tennessee. We want to play Kentucky. We want to go to bowl games. You got to be, this stadium you got isn't going to cut it. You need to be thinking a little about these things. And it resonated with the people in Charleston, the political people down there. So when the time came around in the mid 70s, around 76, 77, to deal with the stadium, the people specifically in Charleston said, no, we're going to build it someplace else. And part of it was because there was no place to park downtown. You're going to drive 3, 4, 5 hours to come to a college football game. Last thing in the world you want to do is to drive around downtown for another hour until you can find an open spot in Westover,
That's right.
and so the decision was made, okay, well, we'll build it out by the hospital. And I remember Leland Bird telling me this, and it's a real quick story. When the hospital didn't want it, they didn't want the stadium next to the hospital because obviously it was on where the golf course was, but it kind of encroached on their property and territory. And then above, you had the law school. And at the time, Gordon Gee was the dean of the law school, and Gee was all for it because he thought that would be a great way to recruit law students. You could have parties, you could do all the things that are associated with a football game, and it would be great for the law school. But the hospital wasn't for it. Well, at the time, Jay Rockefeller was the governor, and Rockefeller being Rockefeller, he said, "Well, listen," he's telling to the hospital people, "I'll build you a 4-lane highway, and we'll run it right in front of your front door if we can have the football stadium site." And so that's how they resolved the deal with the hospital. They got a 4-lane road next to their hospital. So things work. And I think in this instance, there were a lot of things that were going on at the time at WVU. And again, the point I make is that Bowden benefited from it later when he went to Florida State, and West Virginia certainly benefited from all the things that Bobby Bowden did while he was here.
Yeah. And Greg, something you and I have talked about a lot on the show is the importance of the AD and the choice making that the AD, and you're accurate in terms of Red Brown wanted Tom Hart. Well, I remember this from the book I wrote, and I just pulled up. If you look at Tom Hart's record at Cornell, he was at Cornell before he went to Duke. He was 19, 23, and 3. Then he went to Duke, and he was 22 and 28. Then he went to Indiana State, and he was 20 and 31. He won over his career 61 games and lost 82. So the decision bring Tom Hart. Nothing against Tom Hart. This is not a character assassination of Tom Hart, but it would huge difference in the future of college football to to really go with Carlin instead.
Well, you go back. I mean, Hart was a Massillon guy, I believe, and I know he was also from the Earl Blake chain. And back then, Earl Blake at Army was the guy that you wanted to, he was kind of the Nick Saban from that era of the 40s and 50s. So that was part of it. But I think one of the things about Red Brown, and Eddie Barrett pointed this out to me. If you look at Red Brown's hires, okay, they were all either assistants or guys that were either getting into coaching ranks for the first time. If you look at his basketball hires, Fred Schaus, who was a pro player that he brought in, and he brought him in to babysit Hot Rod Hundley, and then you had George King, who was Schaus's assistant, and then you had Bucky Waters, who was Vic Bubas's assistant, and then you had Sonny Moran, who was Bucky's assistant. And then if you look at the football hires, he hired Gene Corum, who was Art Lewis's assistant, Jim Carlin, who was an assistant, and then Bobby Bowden, who was assistant. And what in the way that Barrett explained it to me is that these were guys that Red could control. It wasn't some strong, armed, opinionated head coach that was going to come in and run him in 15 different directions. Although Carlin and Waters turned out to be that way. That was the thought process, at least the way Eddie Barrett explained it to me, as to who the coaches were that Red Brown hired. Up and coming guys that you didn't have to pay a ton of money right off the bat. Let them develop, and then see if they grow and have an affinity for WVU, and either are willing to stay or figure out ways to keep them around.
Wow, that is a great story. Greg, I'll tell you, we're getting our money's worth tonight.
Absolutely. One of the fascinating things, and I think folks start reading this book, I don't think people think about the dynamics of everything that's involved in a program and coaching and that sort of thing. And you mentioned all the things that were going on back during that time period. Uh, Things still are going on today, that coaches have to deal with different dynamics, people from different places. And the political world right now is crazy, and I don't think folks recognize what all goes into coaching, and it's interesting to see how this tied together, where these things help.
Well,
Bobby
I know
Bowden.
Frank is of that era, so he could appreciate this. I can remember Mike Sherwood telling me the story about that, and I don't remember the name of. I think it was the Blue Tick Tavern. There used to be a bar in Towers where they would go and hang out, and he told me the story. He's sitting there. He had a low draft number, and so they're sitting there drinking a pitcher of beer, watching the draft, wondering whether they were going to go to Vietnam, and and Sherwood had a number that came up, but he had failed his physical when he had a knee injury in high school, and he failed his physical, so he didn't go. But those were the things that guys were thinking about. And Kent State happened Bobby's first year. Well, think about this. This is the first year in 1970. This is Bowden's first year. You had the campus protesting. You had Kent State. There was big protesting going on at Ohio State and some of the other adjacent colleges. There was some protesting going on at WVU, but it wasn't quite to the scale that they had. And I know that Governor Moore, Arch Moore, had brought he brought the National Guard in to disperse the protesting that went on, because the students wanted WVU's president Jim Harlow to denounce the incursion into Cambodia that was going on at the time. And of course, Harlow didn't want any part of it because his brother Bryce was in the Nixon administration, so he wasn't going to bring politics into this. That's something that Bobby had to deal with. That year in 1970, in January of that year, you had the two co-ed murders, Merritt and Karen. And there is a phenomenal podcast that was done a few years ago that kind of just sets a picture of that era on campus at WVU. There was a prosecuting attorney in Morgantown that had a bomb. His car was bombed because he was prosecuting vice and gambling in the county. Loretta. That had happened around that time. You had the co-ed murders, and they never did find the heads of the two bodies. that was going on. You had a brawl, a bench clearing brawl between on basketball. A Syracuse player punched an official. People came out of the stands. There was a lot of things going on. There were a lot of things going on at campus at that time in Bobby's first year. A lot of things that he had to navigate, and and you mentioned, all of the different cultural things, and he's got to integrate the school. You've got people from different places, and I don't think fans. I know Frank and I were talking about this yesterday on a phone call we had about how Gail Catlett had to mold his teams together, because at West Virginia, it's not like you're at Duke in basketball or you're at Ohio State in football. You don't pick your rosters, right? You don't get to pick your players. You have to get the best players that fit what you do, or the best players that you can get, and you have to kind of figure out, okay, what am I going to do with what I've got? How do I mold all this together? How do I mold all these personalities in the locker room and get everybody together? And that's part of the deal that you have to do at West Virginia. And it doesn't matter whether you're Bobby Bowden or you're Don Nealon or you're Rich Rodriguez or you're Neil Brown or Dana Holgerson. That's always going to be the case here. And the coaches that are able to do that and bring all that together, in addition to teaching and developing and coaching and all of it, that's all part of the ball game. And I don't think fans always realize that or appreciate that. All they're obviously, fans are looking at the end product. Do you win the game? Do you play well? And Terry brought this up. Terry mentioned this to me, and he had some really fascinating viewpoints. He said, college sports is basically white hats and black hats, right? Right? You got the good guys and you got the bad guys. Well, the good guys your team, and the bad guys the other team. Well, guess what? The good guys and the bad guys are basically recruiting the same players, right? It's the same talent pool. It's the same guys. So our guys are the good guys and the other guys are the bad guys. Well, it's the same deal, right? It's the same people. And the other thing he mentioned too, he says, everybody's got the best band. Everywhere he's ever been, it's the best band, right? Best marching band, wherever you go. Well, okay, maybe it is, maybe it's not. But that's how fans are. You don't score enough points, if you're not throwing the ball enough. There's always something there that people have to discuss, or that's why we have podcasts and talk shows and columnists.
That's right.
Yep. Yep.
Get the information out there, John, how people can buy the book and when they can buy the book. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I don't know if I just got it the other day. It's set for release September 1st on Amazon, among other places. But I have a feeling it might be in there a little bit early. So you can pre-order it right now. You can also order it through WVU Press. Barnes & Noble should be carrying it. I'm not sure what brick and mortar stores yet are going to carry it. I know the folks in Charleston, Taylor Books, I think, is a popular place in Charleston. Hopefully, I tell people that ask about getting it in their favorite bookstore, will just go to the bookstore and request it, and they can go and order it and have copies. A lot of these smaller bookstores can't carry a lot of inventory. So I think they probably kind of come and go and order as you go. But they're going to be in some bookstores. You're going to be able to get it at the bookstore here. I believe the team store they're working on that out right now, where you can have it in the team store. So you should be able to get it at the stadium when you come to the games, or in the brick and mortar team store that's along Patterson Drive. So should be in a number of places, and it's and the thing about it is it's a readable book. I don't spend a lot of time describing the weather or describing Bowden's mood or getting into the gray dark sky. This is a book it's a modern book that you can read. It's not like the old days when you didn't have your phone and you didn't have all these other things to do, and you could sit out on your porch and read a 500-page book. That's not today's reader, and that's what I wrote this for. I wrote this for today's reader, and I think it's a readable book, and I think there's things in there I think that apply to today.
Amen. Amen.
I can't wait to read it. you're looking forward to that,
Yeah.
that's for daggone
Greg, I'm
sure.
going to kick it to you. We talked with John about, and you and I too, getting John's ideas about the current team and also the state of college football. So I'll
Yep,
kick it
yep,
back to you to set it
yep,
up.
sure will. And I feel comfortable talking to John now. Look at I got people around me mowing grass, and every time I see one of his Facebook posts, he's sitting in the backyard with a freshly mowed lawn and having a cold beer. So I feel pretty comfortable with him right now. I feel like I'm sitting on his back porch. But
Amen. Yeah, I'm going to do that too. Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, we're interested to get your thoughts. You know, we've talked to a lot of folks about this coming year's team, and it's been impossible, really, you know, for anybody to really hone in on what to expect because just such a big turnover in the roster, and you're close to the program and you see what's going on. We just want to get your thoughts on this coming year.
Well, I've been going to practices since 1991. And every first practice I've ever gone to, you're undefeated. You're going to be undefeated. Then that second practice, you're going to go, well. And then by the first time they're in pads, you're going to go, you know. Eh, But, whole new turnover. I think, I saw a story last week about this team being a mystery. And I think it is to some degree because I think there's 72 new players, which is an unbelievable number. And I know Rich had, I think, 64 last year at Jack State. So he's got experience dealing with turnover. So that part of it, I think, is going to be new. I will say this. I think the two words that come to mind, I'm hopeful and I am excited because I know that the two things that they can control, effort, right, and toughness, are going to be back. And I think West Virginia fans, um, they don't like losing. There's no question about it. But if your team gives everything it's got and gives it for 4 quarters, right, and they're tough, I think they can stomach it. So the other parts that are going to be needed, the twitch, the athleticism, the speed, the playmakers. I don't know right away. They have some. White is he to me. I think he looks like he's pretty close to 200 pounds. I mean, they've transformed that guy's body. I think to get him ready to get some carries this year. So there are some pieces there, but I think the two things that we identify with Mountaineer football, effort and toughness, that will show up on day one, and that will be the case the entire year because Rich will have it no other way.
I know Frank and I have talked numerous times and the different former players and coaches and that sort of thing. One of the things that I brought up is now again Frank's a lot older than me, but so I go back. My closest memories of the '80s, '90s. But I said, when you look back over the history of Mountaineer football, one of the things that you could always guarantee was that win or lose, the other team was going to know they were in for a battle because it's going to be so physical. And we kind of got away from that. Not to criticize folks here in the past few years, but we've kind of gotten away from that just a little bit. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much excitement coming into this new era is because people want to see that toughness and grit and I think Rich is he'll bring that back, and I think that's what most fans like myself are looking forward to.
Well, that's in our DNA. That's who we are. And in this climate with the transfer portal era, you worry about your roster, what you're going to have from year to year. But I love what Rich said. If a guy's not performing to his expectations, if the effort's not there, I'll go find somebody else you know and I think that's kind of harsh, but I think you almost have to have that viewpoint because here at West Virginia University it's a little bit different. We still have to develop players. There still has to be that component to things. We have to do things a little bit different. You can't just line up like Ohio State and try to play like Ohio State when Ohio State's got players that you don't have. You can't do that. It's just not going to work. That's why Rich runs a high tempo offense. That's why Zach Alley's going to run some different things with his defense. You just can't line up and take them on like that because the players are different. I think that's always got to be an element of what we do, not only in football but in basketball too. You got to have something that's a little bit different than what your teams are doing. So, and I think that's going to be in place. Whether it happens right away, that remains to be seen. But I am confident that those two things are going to happen this year. You're going to see tough players, and you're going to see effort. And I think everything else after that, we'll just take it as it comes.
Right. You mentioned the transfer portal there. One thing before we get off here, we want to get your insights on where do you think all this is headed with the transfer portal and NIL at the House settlement now. There's talk of a commissioner, if you will, somebody to oversee college football. What's your take on where things are headed in college football? I know all of fans like us that don't know a lot about the ins and outs of it, don't know what's going to happen. We hope for certain things to happen, but what do you feel like is going to be the future? What's it going to look like in the next 8, 10 years?
I think we're at a pivot point in our history. I think as an industry, as an entire industry, I think we're at a pivot point. Listen, when the national champion, well, first of all, Ohio State bought its national champion last year. I mean, they did. But when your national champion football team loses money, when the school is losing money, something's wrong. And it's funny because I mentioned this in the Bowden book. The year that Woody won the national championship in 1968, is that right, Frank? I think that was the year they won it. The '69 Rose Bowl, '68 season. High State lost money that year. That was in 1968. That was 57 years ago. And you know what came out of that? An 11th football game. College football, college sports has always been chasing money. And in the '70s, the solution was roster limitations, Division I, Division II, Division III, separate them. Today it's the wild, wild west. It's how much more can we and if you're a player, all right, or you're somebody that's associated with a player, a parent or an advisor, and you look at what the coaches are making, you're saying, well, wait a minute now. Nick Saban made all this money at Alabama. All right, these guys got these phenomenal salaries. Shouldn't we be getting a little bit of it? And absolutely, they should. And you take West Virginia's budget this year, and I'm using round numbers, but West Virginia's budget is roughly around $100 million. Okay, 20 million of that beginning July 1st is now allocated just to play players. Okay. So that's a fifth of your budget that you've taken and you've sliced off right there just for your payroll. And that doesn't include the NIL stuff. Okay. That's separate. That's what Texas Tech's doing to buy their team. Now we'll see how that goes. It may turn out wonderful because they got some phenomenal transfers there. It may get them where they want to go, or in November, if they've lost a few games, it may cause them a lot of problems in the locker room because you don't know how it's going to go. But right now, 1/5 of your budget is allocated just to pay players. And that was used in the past for the volleyball team or the soccer team or salaries or different things that you're doing within your department. It's changing. And where's that money coming from? How do you make up that difference? All these questions, does that impact sports down the road? There's the whole thing about the Olympic developmental program. The NCAA sports has been the United States' greatest Olympic development system in the world. And it's basically tax-free. you know you're using the colleges to develop your Olympic swimmers, Olympic track runners, wrestlers, whatnot. Well, what happens to that? How is that subsidized? How do you make that work? These are all questions I think that ads and presidents and people are just now wrapping their arms around, and there are no easy answers because at some point the spigot's going to turn off, right? And so, you see these schools that have these incredible budgets, and the other thing is that West Virginia, and this is the scary part. And when Ren Baker explained this to me, and I have a 3-part deal on it on the website wvsports.com earlier this summer about where West Virginia sits in the Big 12 in terms of uh, budget. Okay, it's at the bottom, and it will remain at the bottom even when the group of 5 schools stay in, if the campus subsidies remain the same for at Houston and UCF and Cincinnati. And when you measure in what they're making from the media rights and what the campus subsidizes, it's going to go right past us. I mean, it's a challenge, and I think for me, somebody who is a WVU graduate, somebody who has got 2 degrees from here, who's spent my whole life working here, loves this school. Um, we're at a crossroads. We're at a point where you know we'll see what happens, because we can't keep punching above our weight class. Some of those great teams that Rich had, some of those great teams that John Beeline and Bob Huggins had, people grew accustomed to them punching above their weight. Well, it's not easy to do. And eventually, the support's got to be there to match at least what our competitions and our competitors are doing.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thing for Mountaineers and Mountaineer fans to see all this coming down because quite honestly, we just don't have the resources that these other places have. The state's not that big, and it's worrisome. And Frank and I have discussed many times of regionalizing this thing and how nice it would be to see regional play and maybe even base it on the NFL format where you had divisions and those types of things to make it equal for everybody. But I
Well,
don't
it's
think
got to benefit the schools that are calling the shots right now,
right.
the SEC
Yeah,
and the Big Ten, and I don't think they don't really care what West Virginia is doing. But I will
that's
say
right.
this, Greg: we have great fans, and our fans want to win.
Yeah,
There's no question about it. The Mountaineer Nation wants to win, and so as long as you have that, we got a chance.
yeah, oh yeah, and I don't think it would take something drastic to change that. I think the fans have been here thick and thin throughout, good and bad, and I don't think they're going
Yeah,
anywhere. So
and
let's keep
we pull our weight. When we step up, we step up. Whether it was to the Big East and then to the Big, we'll do it. I'm confident that we'll do it, and we've got an AD in Ren Baker who understand. He can rub his 2 fingers together and change loose change just forms in his hand. He's got an unbelievable knack for generating revenue and coming up with unique and out of the box ideas on how to generate revenue. And I think an AD today has to have 2 qualities. The 2 most important qualities for an AD: can they generate revenue and can they hire good people? That's the 2 things. And Ren has got that covered.
so far. Yep, so far so good. Yeah, that you answered my next question. I was going to talk to you about Ren. You answered it perfectly right there. And fingers crossed he stays with us for a long time because, again, Frank and I have talked about him, meeting him and talking to him. Feel very confident in his leadership and
Yeah.
especially in these troubled times because he's obviously very extremely intelligent and seems to have it figured out. I mean, I think he knows.
One point I want to make here real quick.
Good.
It's easy to be able to see what's in front of you and deal with that. And we've had phenomenal ADs throughout our history at dealing with what's in front of us. But I think the secret is seeing a cloud here and feeling a drop of rain and predicting a storm over here. That's the difference.
Yeah.
I think Ren Baker has those qualities. That's the kind of guy you need.
Yeah, I think so too. And like I said, we're confident in that leadership. I think we have discussed that numerous times. Frank, you want to jump in here one more time? We're running a little short of time, so I'll let you jump in before we get off. You may be muted, Frank. Yep.
Technology.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, he's trying to get back in. John, I know this is a busy time for you, man. We're so tickled to have you join us. It's been so much fun listening to these stories, and like I said, uh, can't wait to read the book. And before you leave us, I want one more time, if you will, to go through again how to get the book when it's released and all that. Want to make sure everybody gets that.
Right, right. It's going to be released. It says September 1st on Amazon, but I believe you'll be able to get it a little bit earlier. Barnes and Noble will have it. Those are the two primary online places. WVUpress.com. You should be able to find it there. And the search on Amazon, you can type in my name, John, Antonik, or Bobby Bowden. Either way, it'll come up in a search really easily. Brick and mortar stores, I think they're still working through that, but I know we'll be in places around Morgantown. I'm hopeful that some of the brick and mortar stores in the state will pick it up. I think if you go to those stores and request it, they can easily order it and get it there in stock. So that's an option. And also too, I believe it's going to be at the stadium. So if you come to the games at the stadium, it should be there at the stadium store and also the brick and mortar store. Fingers crossed. I hope they can get that worked out. It'll be at the at the WVU team store on Patterson Drive, which is a great place, by the way. And it's open. The hours are more frequent than it was when it was just in the Coliseum. So go over and see my buddy Chuck Fairs and ask for it, and then buy a couple of those WV hats like this.
Yeah,
Get me one too.
looks good.
Cover my
Please.
head.
Yeah, I need a couple of those. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's good. Uh, Frank, you with us now?
I didn't do anything, but
There
am
you
I
are.
back?
You are back.
Yeah, very good. I don't know why it did that. Although there is a note that popped up and said, "How dare you talk about Texas Tech?" from a guy named Red Raider. So that could have
Yeah.
been the cause. That
There
could have
you
been
go.
it. Yeah, I can't
Good.
bring it up. But John, you've given us so much food for thought. And what I was going to say before, for some reason, I went mute. Is that you said earlier about the broader context that fans don't sometimes, all fans don't appreciate. Well, given this inflection point we're in, this pivot we're going through, is that we can't expect the game just to be the way it was.
No.
There are implications, there are consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a colleague who comes on the show periodically, Sean Pryor, who has a podcast down in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma has cut athletic staff. University of Southern California, these are brand schools.
I know.
University of Southern California is facing a huge deficit
I
that
know.
will have implications for athletics. And you mentioned Ohio State. Well,
Yeah.
when that happens, that's the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and the traditionalists that don't want names on things or want things preserved, those days are over. And I think
Yeah.
if you're sitting still, somebody's going past you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to think a little bit differently because you're right. It's a different world. It's a different world that we're in, and the things that we are accustomed to, the things that we're used to in the game, it's not the same. And it's just not the same world.
Hmm.
Yep. I think Frank and I, through all the discussions, we've come to grips with that, haven't we, Frank?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You have to.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just not the same.
Adapt and
But
survive, right?
yeah, yeah. But you know what you said at the end, John, I think is a good point to leave, Greg, and that is that over time, Mountaineers have found a way, and this issue about grit and effort, that's so critical because you're right. That's in the DNA. Those are the words you used, and when Greg and I were at the golf tournament that Brian Josiak and the crew hosted, they came up over and over again
Mhm.
in informal conversations and when we interviewed players. And if you can have that as your base, then you can't. Those two things are irreplaceable. If you don't have them, Katie barred the door. But if you have them, you can build from that.
Yep. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me.
All right,
Thank you,
John. Thank you
John.
so much. Can't
Go
wait to read the book.
Mountaineers.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. I'll tell
Appreciate
you
it.
what, Frank. Man, I believe Can you imagine going sitting on his back porch with him and just not talking, just listening?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about John, and and I mentioned this. I've mentioned this to him more than once. I've mentioned it to you and others. Having migrated around the country in higher education, having a person like John isn't something you would expect to find at a lot of schools. I
No.
mean, and it's not just his knowledge; it's the trust that people have in him to share with him things that they might not tell someone else. And
Right.
then we got talking the other day, and I can't remember who it was. I think it may have been a player I was talking with. But then you expand that, and you think about you've got a Tony Caridi, you got a Greg Hunter, you've got, we've had Keenan Cummings, who's a beat writer on the show. You go down the list of these folks, and we're really blessed. Fans are blessed
Oh, yeah.
with the variety and depth and quality of folks who are, are providing us with the kind of information and background that we need to be intelligent fans. And there's no one better. I don't know of anybody better in the country in terms of athletic history than John
Yeah.
Antonik.
Yeah.
It's just who is. I mean, he's
Yeah.
great.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, it's mind-boggling when you listening to him talk, and he starts bringing up stories from you know 50 years ago, or some history from 50 years ago that you didn't know, and even being big Mountaineer fans, there's a lot of things that you don't know, and you hear somebody like him talking, just mind-boggling the information he has and what he's acquired over the years is just truly fascinating. And how lucky again are we just to have someone like that we get to talk to and just listen to. I mean, I just overwhelmed by the knowledge and the information and the stories. The stories are captivating, and I'm sure the book is going to be that way. I know it'll be one you start reading you won't want to put down. I'm sure, and I know you've had a chance to read it, and I'm looking forward to it. So, yeah, how lucky can we be?
Yeah, and the thing about John, which he does all the time, if you read his articles on WV Sports, WVUsports.com, is that he doesn't do hardly any commentary. I mean,
Yeah,
when you think about sports, the turn on ESPN, pretty much
yeah,
all you get is commentary. John
yep,
doesn't do that. He basically presents the voice of other people using his words, his
yeah,
text. And that's
yeah,
rare. It's becoming extremely rare because sports journalism is being dominated by opinions. It's not so much what you know, but it's the opinion you share. And oftentimes, when you think of Stephen A, it's said emphatically as though it's the truth, when in
right.
fact any opinion is just an expression of what you believe. It may or may
Yeah, and
not
so
be
much of
true.
it, yeah, and so much of it's coming from non-journalists, if you will, people that are maybe a former athlete or something. They're suddenly an expert because they played football, played in the NFL, and all you get is their opinion, and you get some good insight from them from maybe a position perspective or something like that. But I've stated numerous times to friends and family watching these different shows say on Saturday prior to football kicking off or whatever, and you hear the opinions and the takes that they have, and you're sitting there thinking uh, they don't know any more about this than I do, you know, and when you realize that, it does make it hard to listen to some of that, and it's refreshing, to get history and to get stories, firsthand accounts of things and that sort of thing. So, it's so refreshing to talk to somebody like John and to hear those things, not just not his opinion. This is what happened, and I think as West Virginia fans, uh, we should appreciate that. That's going to be like I said, the book's going to be fun to read because that's where it's going to be coming from. This is what was said, So, yep,
That's right.
yep. Got it. Speaking
Yep.
of
Yeah,
formal
I would say before we close off this part is that I was telling someone this the other day. Sometimes one of the most deceptive things in the world is when someone's so good at something you think it's easy, but they're so well developed in what they do that you don't realize it. And one of the things that all of these guys, whether it be Caridi or Greg Hunter or John or Keenan, a beat writer, what they have to do is they have to know the boundaries. There are certain things they can't say. There are certain things they can't write. There's certain things they really have to emphasize if they want to stay in a position where they continue to be in the good graces of the institution.
Yep.
Luckily, we're in an environment with Ren Baker where it's not onerous, but I've been affiliated with schools where it's very tough on beat writers because if they say just one thing that's considered critical, not analytical, critical, they're in the doghouse.
Yeah.
And so all these guys here have been able to figure out how you can do your job, say what you need to say, and then continue to have a job to say what you
That's
what you
right.
need
Yeah.
to say. And it's
Yep.
not easy. It's not easy.
Yep. And
Not
and
easy.
and fortunately for us, we reap the benefits of that. We get
Amen.
good stories,
Amen.
good journalism. So it's good to know. We are running out of time, and we
Yep.
did want to mention next week's guest. John Ray, and about that time, John Ray walked out the door, and I said, "You're right."
Uh,
Second biggest human being I've seen. But man,
he
what a
is
football
a
player he was. My
He's
goodness.
a big boy, all right. And he's been looking forward to coming on the show and he's excited about it. And it's just too bad that we couldn't get him on when we were at the
Yeah.
golf tournament, but he understands and he's ready to and raring for next week.
Well, we'll make it up to him, Frank. He'd probably got 15 minutes air time up there. We'll give him a good 45 here and
That's
we'll
right.
make it up to him. So, all right, Frank, great job tonight. Great interviewing with John. Did a wonderful job, and I enjoyed reading your forward on the book. That was good as well. It's always fun to read what you write. I
Yeah,
enjoy that
thanks.
too. So, always fun, and we appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight and spread the word. If you did get a watch tonight, make sure you let folks know that this is on here because I think they'll enjoy listening to John as Mountaineer fans. So make sure you spread the word to those that may have not got a chance to listen tonight. I think they'll be glad that they tuned in. You can go back and watch it after it's archived and listen to John talk about the book and other things. Really, really, really interesting. Appreciate everybody for tuning in, and we appreciate Darren for all his hard work behind the scenes. We look forward to coming to you again next Wednesday night on another episode of Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now. For Frank, I'm Greg. Look forward to seeing you next week. Good night, everyone.